Hello, and welcome to Seance, our Deathtrap tomb design stream here on the Adventure Archive. My name is Ryan, and with me, as always, is the master of the genre himself, Sersa Victory. How you doing this morning, this night, this evening, Sersa?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm chilling. Drinking some of that deliciously unflavored coffee we talked about.
Yeah, we had a nice 45-minute pre-stream chat
It
about
was
coffee,
like it
about
was
all the
like 10
disgusting candy that
minutes.
Ryan likes.
Listen, there's nothing wrong with candy corn or circus peanuts, but anyway, no rebuttal to that. We are we're designing Deathtrap dungeon puzzles. Part 2 of puzzles tonight. So what's the plan?
Yeah, so if you're just joining us, this is the second episode where we are going to design a puzzle for use in our Deathtrap dungeon that we've been designing collaboratively over the course of this series. So if you have not watched episode 1 from last week, definitely recommend you go back and check that out, since there's a lot of material that we're going to draw on in this episode. So in that episode, I gave an overview, a very, very quick overview of part of my process for designing lore-based puzzles for dungeon crawling games like D&D, and talked about some of the issues that can crop up with what I call checkout line puzzles, the kinds of puzzles that you would often see in books that you might buy off of Drive-Thru or DM's Guild. And we did an example puzzle to illustrate that process. So what we're going to do in this episode is use that process to create from scratch a new puzzle for our adventure, the Carnal Vault of the Corroded Goddess, I believe it's called.
I think so. We haven't even actually talked about that in a couple episodes.
Yeah. But yeah, we've got a couple things to get through tonight. It's going to be, thankfully, very light on lecture because we sort of did all that last week. So in tonight's episode, we're going to just jump right into the exercise. But before we do that, I'm curious if you have anything that you wanted to say before we get started tonight, or thoughts that you've had in the intervening week about puzzles. I know this was a lot of information that I threw at people, so I'm curious if you have been mulling it over. I know that some people have given us good feedback about that episode, and one buddy of mine, as soon as he finished listening, couldn't not see checkout line puzzles everywhere. Right? It's one of those things where once you hear about it, that's all you see. But I'm kind of curious what your thinking has been on the back of last week's episode.
I'll be honest, I'm a blank slate, I loved the lecture. I think it's fantastic, and then it's great for people to hear and people to listen to. I really enjoyed all of that conversation. I'm just excited to actually get in and apply it, because all of the processes that we've used and actually applying the things that we built for the dungeon have been so much fun, and so just eye-opening on how simple the process can be, but how applicable and effective it is for building a dungeon that feels intentional. So it's going to be, we talked about how puzzles are just, I often avoid them because they suck. And, then you realize a lot of them are these checkout puzzles. So building something that actually feels like it belongs is going to be fun and interesting. And that's what, I'm just hyped to get into actually doing that.
Yeah, likewise. I think tonight's going to be a really interesting episode. I had some extra notes prepared about the topics that we covered in last week's episode, particularly related to things like making more complex puzzles by nesting puzzles together. I did cut that, but for those who are watching or listening, if that's something that you would like to learn more about, leave a comment in chat, or leave a comment on YouTube or in Discord, or hit us up on Twitter, and we can definitely work some of that material into maybe one of the wrap-up episodes that we do of this series. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I had to cut for time, unfortunately. One of the other things I want to say before we begin is that, this is just one process for creating puzzles. In the previous episode, I did highlight what I think are some pretty endemic issues with the way that puzzles are largely created for games like D&D. And I feel like lore puzzles, as described in the previous episode, are especially good at hitting on some of the important moments, the iconic moments of Deathtrap dungeon design, and encourage a lot of fun behaviors and sets the foundation for an engaging play experience. But lore puzzles are not the only way to create interesting puzzles for dungeon role-playing games. This is just happens to be the one that I find the most useful. So there may be other examples of puzzle design that falls outside of this. I don't want anybody to get the impression that this is the one and only way to create puzzles. So that being said, I think we can just blast right onto the Jamboard.
Okay, all right. Let's do it. Let's see if I actually have it up. Well, let me get this out of the way. All right, Jamboard is up.
Awesome, and we should be on slide number 16.
16. Oh, I thought you said 6. 8, 9, 10. This is with a lady?
That is correct.
All right.
Yeah, I just grabbed some random picture that I thought would be kind of evocative. So what I have here is a slide on our Jamboard where we can do our brainstorming tonight for creating this puzzle. I know in previous episodes we talked a little bit about what we might do with the puzzle. What I wanted to do tonight was kind of clean slate that, just so we can better demonstrate the process end to end, right?
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely.
But what I did want to do though was keep the verb that we chose and the material that we chose. So for those of you who may not know what we mean by verb and materials, go back to the very first episode of the series where we talk about dungeon theme keywords, dungeon verbs, and dungeon materials. But basically, what we want to do is use a thematic verb as the sort of the linchpin of our puzzle solution. So we want the puzzle to invite the players to do something that reinforces the theme of the dungeon. So one of the dungeon verbs we have was preserve or protect. So protect something from corrosion, right? Mm-hmm. And then the material we chose was grubs. That was sort of on the corrosion side of the table. And so our puzzle is going to require the players to preserve or protect something from corrosion, either using grubs or protect them from grubs. That's something we can maybe work out as we do this puzzle design. So with that out of the way, as described in the previous episode, the first thing that we need to do is come up with our puzzle's solution. And really what this is just an interesting, dramatic, thematic, risky action that the players can take. And we don't have to come up with anything particularly clever to outsmart the players, because that's not what we want to do with the puzzle. Rather, we want to encourage the players to do something cool and risky and thematic. And I have a little template here that I made, kind of a little Mad Lib that I use for my own puzzles that kind of help get the process going. So for those who may be listening and can't see it, this template is to, and then in brackets, claim a reward. The party must verb a material, and then either with a special trait or using a special method, right? So this is going to be our puzzle solution template. Now we already have our verb, and we already have our material, so we can pop those in immediately. So to claim reward, which we'll figure out in a second, you must preserve. And now with the material, we have grubs as our material. Do we want to preserve from or protect from grubs, or preserve with grubs? So which one of those jumps out at you? So we can have our puzzle solution be, we have to protect something from corrosive grubs, or we preserve or protect something with grubs. The grubs themselves have some kind of preserving or protective effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What would be it would be kind of interesting to try to subvert it and use grubs to protect, but I just kind of feel like I don't know. I feel like in the course of the theme of the dungeon, the thing that we're trying. Okay, so are we just starting from scratch, or are we using things from the previous dungeon parts? I guess that is this to fit into what we've already done.
Let's try to start from scratch so we can kind of not necessarily
Gotcha.
overload the other elements we already have.
Okay. Well, so just one of the overarching things we have in the dungeon we're building is the bones, and they have to like protect those bones and stuff like that. So what jumps into my head right away is either protect the bones from grubs or use the grubs to somehow protect the bones. I feel like everything in the dungeon is kind of attacking the bones. It'd be interesting. One of the things we did talk about was like the grave wax or something used to protect. It'd be neat if that was kind of the only way. I don't know. What are you thinking?
So we can go with the sort of the obvious choice, which is the bones, where we have to protect them from corrosive grubs. That's part of the puzzle. What we might also do is pick something that we sort of make up on the spot, because one of the things with puzzles that I didn't talk about in the last episode was where to place them.
Mm-hmm.
And typically what you want to do is use puzzles to gate access to optional rewards, right? Mm-hmm. And so when the players, if a situation comes up where they feel they don't want to engage with the puzzle or they struggle with it, now as we talked about, because they're not trying to outsmart them with like a weird clever like math problem or whatever, or a cipher, that's less likely to happen. But you still want to try to make sure that if the players are unwilling or unable to engage with the puzzle and solve it, they can still proceed in the adventure, right? So what we might do, and this is where our claim reward comes in. Maybe we'll come back to that in a second here. I'll put this little X in brackets. What is our optional reward? So it can be something that is helpful in the final confrontation. It can be something that alters the dungeon to the player's advantage. Again, it's not something they have to find, but if they go out of their way to solve the puzzle, they're going to get this reward. So why don't we start with that, maybe work backwards. So we're just totally freestyling here, as we talked about in the previous episode. Like, we're not using any particularly, clever or complicated.
Right. Well, one of the things I like about puzzles like this, right, is that you often, like we're doing right now, you can see the solution, and then your job is to figure out how to get there, as opposed to, like, what you talked about with checkout puzzles, where it's like, if you don't know the answer, you just don't know the answer. There's not really a way to go about it. I'd much rather, like, and when you really think of like movies and stuff like that too, where this kind of stuff comes up, a lot of times it's like, maybe it feels trappy, but it still uses the same kind of concept where it's like you have to cross this room, right? And there's all these traps, along the way, but it kind of feels like a big puzzle as you go across, because there's a solution to defeat the traps as you go. You can just tweak it a little bit different. I like the idea of like you said, like maybe you can see a door on the other side of a room and you got to figure out how to cross that room is a lot more interesting to me than like, here someone somewhere wrote a algebraic equation on the wall and, chiseled it in and figure it out. So I don't think we should gate off anything like any of the sarcophagi that need to be. We actually just got a raid here from Mr. Bayless. Thanks so much for coming over, Bay.
Oh, thank you, Bayless.
So I don't think that we should gate off anything like that, because I feel like those are too important. So it should be something less important than that.
Or it should be something that is a nice to have, a nice bonus that can make the players' lives easier, but not something that's required to complete the adventure. I've gone back to our cyclic dungeon generation board, just look at our notes, And we got a couple little elements here. Of course, we got the sarcophagolem that walks around. Potentially, the puzzle can be something that either neutralizes the looming threat of the sarcophagolem or potentially makes the sarcophagolem helpful rather than harmful. That's something we can do. Again, it's not something that's required, but it can make their life easier. I know we have the 2 NPCs that are sitting around towards the beginning. We have the final confrontation with the corroded goddess, and we might have something that gives the players a boon there. Does anything kind of grab you from that list?
Well, what do you think about this, right? So when to activate the sarcophagolem, we decided that the players might like put one of the bones that they have into it, thinking that it's a sarcophagus they're supposed to put it in, and that actually activates the sarcophagolem and sends it on its path, right?
And according to our notes here, it's part of the false goal cycle that we rolled.
Right.
And so it looks like you awaken the golem when you put the bones in. It appears at first to be one of the actual like MacGuffin sarcophagi. It wakes up, and before it patrols, it like freaks out and breaks open a wall that leads to a secret chamber that has the true sarcophagus in it.
The MacGuffagolem. We got. So my thought is, if this is a later puzzle in the adventure, right, where they've had to and we've already talked about the sarcophagolem is going to be pretty damn impossible to beat. Like it would be very difficult to actually defeat it. It's better to avoid it and have it be this constant like kind of like threat that's rotating around and stuff like that. If this is a later puzzle, what if this would lead to something that would allow them to retrieve the bone back from the sarcophagolem? Like something that would so this, they don't have to, but getting that bone back would be really helpful at the end, we've decided. So what if there's something on the sarcophagolem that they realize this might be a key to getting that back somehow?
You know, not only that, but I'm looking at our GM board from that episode. We have like sarcophagus Katamari Damacy.
Yeah. Every time it goes through the room, it gets bigger and bigger as it picks up more of the sarcophagi from the room.
Yeah, it says assembles when interacted with, and then a choice of which priestesses coverstones become fists. Oh yeah, because we have the it gets worse moment. So essentially, each time it completes the circuit, it's gathering up more tombs. So one thing that we might have the puzzle do is essentially invert the penalties that the sarcophagolem's accumulated tombs has collected. So basically, like they solve the puzzle, and then what was at first a debuff or makes the threat more dangerous, instead they can get some kind of reward for each of the different pieces that got accumulated on the sarcophagolem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't we roll with that for now? So we have two. Let's see here. To reverse or we'll just say to make the sarcophagolem. I can't even spell my cord's in the way. We'll just say let's make it friendly. We'll just make it easy to remember what we're doing. To make the sarcophagolem friendly, you must protect something from corrosive grubs. So this something is just basically going to be a just a piece of the puzzle. It doesn't have to be anything significant. It doesn't have to be anything that has any kind of relevance beyond the puzzle. So basically, like there's something that has to get protected from grubs. If you do so correctly, then it would allow us to. I'm going to delete these. We already have them. It would allow us to make the sarcophagolem friendly and benefit from its powers.
Yeah.
So this can just be any thematic thing. Doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. I like it. And yeah, just starting with either friendly, like I said, or like getting, or like you said, or getting the bone back or do something. Somehow it becomes not a threat anymore and gives him some type of bonus. I think that's great. And again, if they don't have to do this.
That's right.
But you know, it would be helpful to not have this thing constantly getting bigger and bigger. and potentially having that boon at the end when they get to the Charnel Goddess. So
Yeah.
I like the idea personally, and I know this is kind of like the standard direction of it. I kind of like the idea of the grubs being the problem that they have to defeat. Like, what immediately jumps in my head is, and we'll obviously expand from there, but I imagine, like, what if there was like a whole pool of these grubs, right, just like grubbing around, all grubby, and as soon as anything falls into it, it immediately is just like whatever slime or whatever that the grubs are secreting, it just like instant corrosion, and they have to figure out some way to be protected or whatever from the corrosion of the grubs to get to where they are supposed to go.
I love
or
it.
whether it's a room or an item or something like that.
That rule. So to make the sarcophagus friendly / get bone back, you must protect. I guess so that would be protect themselves. Protect self from corrosive grub pool and enter it. Right.
Right. Well, so I mean, it could be, it's all your armor, weapons, all those kind of things, right? So then the easiest solution would just be get naked, right? And then you would be fine. But I feel like that's a little too easy. But
yeah, and that's not a lore puzzle as such, like we.
Listen, you got a naked lady. It feels like lore, on the picture there, Anyway.
Yeah. So either the characters must protect themselves, or they must protect something else, and then lower it into the pool. Like to use the image as kind of like this could be a spirit that sort of wanders. It could even be the manifestation of the patina ghost.
We don't have we haven't really messed with the patina ghost, have we? Because we use the like, it's not a rust wraith, right? Was it? There's like a bone fragment wraith or something in the one room already.
Like
So also the patina ghost is a great thing to use too, because we're in a corroded thing right now, right? And patina is like, something on it. I like the patina ghost situation. I also like what you just said though, where if they're not protecting themselves, maybe they do have to lower something through the grubs or whatever and have to figure out how to protect it in its pathway over somehow.
Yeah. And I like the idea, like I'm sort of talking as I'm thinking, but essentially they find a way to get the patina ghost to manifest herself as like a human figure. She is the key. Like if she can get down into the grub pool, there's something that she can do. Maybe her actual physical body is down there. And the player characters must protect her from the corrosive grub pools. And that's where this last little Mad Lib thing comes in. This is where the puzzle starts popping off. It's not just, any old protection will do. Like we need to identify either a specific, probably method would be more appropriate in this case. So essentially we need to come up with a very specific method of protection that is kind of dramatic. I kind of use the phrase like Lord of the Ringsy, like in the previous episode, the solution to the puzzle was like you must chisel a statuette from the lost foundation stones of the cursed temple of Sekhmet. You know what I mean? Like some dramatic, very sort of over the top stuff like that. And so in this case, it's like to make the sarcophagus friendly or get the bone back, you must protect manifestation using a particular special method, and that will protect her from the corrosive grub pool, allow her to enter it, right? And so with a special method, this can be literally anything you come up with, but it's got to be specific to the adventure. It's got to be special, dramatic. It's got to be something that like sounds cool when you say it, right? More interesting than she's got to, take her armor off or do this. Like there needs to be some lore connection, right?
Right. So question real quick. So we have this situation earlier, right, with the fungus spider, right?
Yeah.
Where we have the statues and they have to like rotate the statue or whatever to stop the water. So we have already this thing in the dungeon. There's a couple things that I feel like are becoming like normal pieces, right? We talked about the skeleton heads and that situation. And I think the statues or statuettes throughout the whole thing would be a cool little piece to kind of have a consistency through it too. And what if, you know, those other ones are statues or statuettes? What if the patina ghost is also a similar statue to that, but has this patina ghost aspect to it? Maybe all of the, and we also have the sarcophagolem where it's a bunch of priestesses in the sarcophaguses or whatever, right? Like that's their crypt room. What if and we have the NPC in the beginning, right, who is a priestess. What if all of the statuettes through the whole place, or statues the whole place, are two like high priestesses or something like that, kind of in a Virgin Mary, like saints of a goddess kind of way? I like it. So then this could be like, and when they get the statues earlier, we could even put little lore bits on them where it says like this is the saint of whatever, and that with the spider bits. So the patina ghost could actually be a personification of one of these quote unquote saints to the charnel goddess, and that could be the lore bit to how they even figure out the puzzle. Like, what is she the saint of in this aspect, right? And by figuring that out, it could be the key to figuring out what protects what it could be, because it could be even needed to protect the statue itself. What if an item or something is in like the hand of the statue, but if the grubs get to the statue, they chew through the whole thing or something like that? How does this sit with you? I like this idea of the statuette and the saints. So I have, to make the sarcophagolem friendly or to get a bone back, you must protect the patina ghost manifestation from the corrosive grub pool by coating her physical body, or coating her manifestation body, the one that talks to the players, with the dust of the milled up statuette of Saint somebody. So they have to find the statuette of a specific saint, crush it up into dust, and then cover the manifestation's body with that dust so that she can enter the grub pool and then do whatever needs to happen. So check this. These are all full-size statues, right? Full people-size statues. But what if in the sarcophagolem room, right, some of these still, like, not broken up because they're so old, whatever, like sarcophaguses have little statuettes on them?
That'd be cool. I love it.
So then they have to go back to the sarcophagolem room, find the correct statuette, which also links it back to the idea that this puzzle is a key to something about the sarcophagolem. Yes, I like it. And then they have to find the correct statuette, make their way back here, and then that will get them to some puzzle, some reward that will actually help them either defeat the sarcophagolem, turn it friendly, get the bone back, something like that. It'll link it to the lore of the saints of the goddess and to the sarcophagolem at the same time.
Boom. See, look at that. You are spinning the thread, my friend. So I am, let's see here. I'm looking up various word translations to come up with a cool name for the saint. Let's see here. What is grub? It doesn't come up with anything. Vermin. I like it. Let's see here. You like to do Latin, right? In the past, you've kind of done
I like Latin, but also I think we I think we have this, I don't, it's in my brain, I don't know if it's in your brain, but I have this idea with this adventure where we talked about like the two NPCs in the beginning. The lich looking one ends up actually, and the gross one that like eats your buddy or whatever is actually the good guy, and that like all of these very like religious kind of nun and like saint like figures and all this kind of stuff end up actually being the bad guy, and we kind of give little lore hints throughout the whole thing so that when they get to the end they realize actually the charnel goddess is like, she's the bad guy. I like the idea of all of the saints being like saints of bad shit, You know what I mean? She's not the saint of like good hearts or something like that. I like what you were just looking at, like the saint of like vermin and the saint of worms and the saint of, you know, like whatever, rust and stuff like that. Like bad stuff. And then people are still going to be like I feel like people the whole way through are going to be like, if this is a saint of literally like, you know, murdering kids or whatever, like that's probably not the good thing. Like how like, you know, I'm hoping people put things together by the end, and when they get to that final room realize that, you know, they're like, oh shit, she's been the quote unquote bad guy the entire time. It's just our misperceptions of the presentation.
Right.
So her being the saint of something bad would be dope.
I dig
especially
it. So,
and we're helping her, which, you know, supposedly helps us, but really hurts us or something.
that's right. So I got like, let's see, Saint of Centipedes, Saint of.
Ooh. Well, what did grubs turn into? So that's the other thing. What are the grubs turning into?
Oh, that's a good point. Like maybe like moths or locusts or something. What do grubs? Flies? Is that what they turn into?
Like a bot fly? Ugh.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a
Let's
bot
see,
fly?
they turn into beetles. Beetles.
Is that it?
Like, well, I guess these specific grubs, but yeah, beetles, maybe scarabs. We could do like scarabs, I guess. Like they turn into rust scarabs.
I love scarabs, but scarab, I feel like we're hitting on like a tomb religious-y vibe, and I feel like scarab immediately hits with that like kind of like, you know, quasi Egyptian vibe as soon as you stay.
Mm-hmm.
What all do grubs turn into? Let's see. Grubs are mistaken for worms based on wriggly bodies. They're the larval state. They turn into, and then pupas. Do they are grubs really only beetles? Huh.
I mean, they can turn into whatever we want. I mean,
yeah. They could literally turn into like skeletons if we want them to. It doesn't really matter. But then I got really curious, and we both like spaced out on what this turn. Grubs turn into beetles. Like, yeah, they grow from larvae and eat grass regularly. They become beetles. I do like the idea of some type of like, you know, corrosive beetle situation or something like that. So, what's a cool beetle besides like maybe a scarab, or is there another name for beetle or something like that it can be into? Like she could even have like beetle like markings on her outfits or something like that too.
Mm-hmm.
But
let's see what else. There's a firefly, a weevil. Weevils are kind of a funny name.
weevils, yeah, does not hit quite as hard.
Yeah. Scarabs, beetles. Or we can just kind of pick any bug, really. I mean, we could do like.
It really could.
You know, centipede's my go-to. We could also do like. What's another insect that we kind of associate with? Like termites, like the saint of termites would be kind of freaky.
Termites, they eat a bunch of stuff. Is there? I'm trying to think of something that literally like just like even like locust is one of, I think one of the saints absolutely has to be locust. I think even if it doesn't quote unquote fit like the theme of corrosion, I think the concept of literally just like eating and destroying everything, and then moving on still fits that vibe of just like rapid destruction.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about that. We could do. Oh, how can we go about carrion beetles?
Oh my god, that's it. That's the one. How is that not a, like, you're right.
So basically have the saint of carrion beetles. I mean, that sounds kind of cool.
Yes, 100%.
Boom, yeah. We're doing it, folks.
Well, now here's the thing. What is the okay, so I was gonna say what is the official name of carrion beetle, but we're not gonna use necrophilia. It's literally called the North American carrion beetle is literally named Necrophilia americana. So we can't really call her the saint of necrophilia. I feel like that's not gonna go over super great.
No, it's like an album name.
Nicrophorus americanus. Nicrophorus.
Necrophorus.
Yeah. That
So
could
do you
be at
want
least
to?
her name. Like Nicrophorus, like saint
Oh, like
of.
this Saint. We can just do Saint Necro, like this, like Phosphorus, like Necrophorus, like that
Where are you writing?
on the Jamboard.
I don't see any writing.
It should be on the slide 16. I wonder if it's there you go.
Oh, we could do Necrophorus. Yeah, it's actually in IC, but I think in EC is definitely better. I think it's a nice mix of both.
We can kind of feminize it, make it Saint Necrophorus like that.
Oh yeah, I like that.
There we go.
I love that. So that's a nice little tweak on Nicrophorus americanus, which is the American carrion beetle. Tweak it a little bit, and then that's carrion beetle. That is sick. So
Yeah. So here's a quick question for you though before we move on. Because as we've talked about oftentimes in this series, when inspiration strikes, there's nothing wrong with going back to what you've done previously and tweaking it or adjusting the results of things like random rolls. Do we
drop the
want to
grubs
change
and
it?
add carrion beetles.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yep. Hundo. One hundo.
Boom. So we have basically our puzzle solution. And again, this is kind of what we were getting at in the previous episode, which is note that we've not sat down and tried to come up with any like weird ciphers or codes or crosswords or things like that. We've just basically spent the first part of this episode coming up with a really dope like thing to do that's kind of tied to the lore. So the solution to the puzzle is to make the sarcophagolem friendly / to get the bone back. You must protect the manifestation, the fleshy manifestation of the patina ghost, from the carrion beetle pool in which her body rots by coating her with the dust of the milled up statuette of Saint Necrophorus. How dope is that?
That's what's up. That's what's up.
Awesome. So we've got our puzzle solution. The next thing is going and creating the syllogism that we talked about in the previous episode. So do you have any last notes before we kind of move on to coming up with this like the syllogism and then getting our premises and our conclusion kind of laid out? Sort of the actual meat and potatoes of the puzzle.
Yeah. So here's a question for consistency, right? So if all of the statues and statuettes and everything are saints to the goddess, right? Then does it make sense for the whatever we're trying to protect to also be the saint, or should it maybe be like more like one of the allies of the lich NPC in the beginning, like someone who was kind of like, you know, fighting against somehow or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That might be something we could bracket
and talk about when we actually write it.
Yeah. Well, what I like to do, you know, with each of these different exercises we do each episode, it's kind of like getting the ideation, like the ideas down, and then we can kind of go back over it and go, okay, do we need to tie up some lore stuff or make some adjustments? Because what happens is this
stuff.
Yeah, because this is advice for people who might be wanting to use these processes to design their own dungeons. It's really easy to get yourself jammed up.
Right, we can sit here for the next 5 hours and really go through this.
Yeah.
100.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in like, you know, we'll fix it in post. So the next thing we're going to do is get cooking on our, make it a little smaller here, get cooking on our syllogism. So as I said, you know, we're going to be hitting on stuff that we talked about in the previous episode. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, definitely go back and check out the previous episode. But basically what we have here is a form of syllogisms, or a logical structure that human beings use to reason from premises. And we'll be using a really common type of syllogism called the categorical one. So kind of like what we did before, we have this little template here, and we're going to fill this template out to come up with the clues for our puzzle. So the first premise of the conclusion here, sorry, that's the conclusion right here. And then we have our premises. So we have all or the or only X is Y. So in this case, I feel like we're not doing like a big group of things. So I think our pattern for this, I don't know why this thing's freaking out on me here. Here we go. So only X is Y. So I think this might be our X is our statuette. So only the statuette, or it could just be only Saint Necrophorus is Y. So let's come up with an interesting bit of lore. Again, this is a lore puzzle that I was talking about in the previous episode. We're just coming up with cool details. What's something unique about Saint Necrophorus in her lore that we could use to populate this little part of the syllogism here? So only Saint Necrophorus is something. Something she is, maybe something she did. Any kind of interesting trait about her.
Well, so we've already established that she's somehow with the carrion beetles, you know, something about her is going to protect something from the carrion beetles, right? So if she is somehow the patron saint of carrion beetles in some way, I feel like having that lore bit is also going to help them know which statuette to get and stuff like that. Because I can also imagine when they really start digging around in the room, they can find a sarcophagus covered in beetles and be like, it's probably that statuette, right? So I don't know.
Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go for it.
I said I do have an idea that can link back to the question that you asked a few minutes ago. Okay. But I don't want to run roughshod over you if you got ideas.
No, go for it. Roughshod it up.
So we talked about, okay, we have all these saints of the goddess. What is it about this particular saint that ties her back to making the sarcophagus friendly, to maybe being connected with the Lich? So a lore detail, again, we're kind of inventing this just off the top of our head right now, is only Saint Necrophorus escaped the corroded goddess's purge of heretics. Boom. So that's a lore detail about her, is that she was only her managed to escape the corroded goddess's purge of those who would turn against her, right?
Interesting.
So that would help explain, and we didn't need to work this out right now, but that can help explain maybe why she is the part of this puzzle to, you know, do something to make the players put the players in a better position to defeat the corroded goddess, right? Like this saint in particular.
Or it's actually could even be the invert of that, where she was one of the heretics against the carnal goddess or whatever, and that's why she's like the ghost or whatever, and that's why using her actually helps the players.
So what we want to put for the lore? So only Saint Necrophorus. What is her unique trait that we want to put here for the this will be our first premise.
I say let's go with what you said first, and we can fix it in post. I like that she escaped the purge, or she, you know, only she turned against the charnel goddess or something like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So now we have,
let's just go with that for now.
And that will be our first clue. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into the sticky note here. So only Saint Necrophorus, I love that name, escape the corroded goddess's purge of heretics. Let's see if this even fits. Okay, that's not too bad. So that's our first premise.
This is another quick side thing we can add in post. I love the idea of also, because we have like this kind of like phosphorus kind of feel to the name too. Mm-hmm. Having the beetles glow in some way, you know? I like it. I'm going to just make a little note here to myself. Yeah, even if it's just like the eyes. So not anything crazy, but just like having a little something to even like pull that in a little bit. Pop that up over her picture.
Awesome. So the next premise in our categorical syllogism pattern is some specific thing is X, right? So we can pick one of the terms here. We can pick Saint Necrophorus, or we can pick Escape the Corroded Goddess's Purge. So what we could do is, let's see here. It would be either, whoops, hang on a second. Only Saint Necrophorus, Escape the Corroded Goddess's Purge. So it'd be something like the statuette of the saint with, and then we'll put like some detail. Escaped the purge. Because what we want to do with a syllogism is that you need both of the premises together to come to the conclusion, right? So we only want this second premise here to relate to either, basically we want it to either identify Saint Necrophorus but not say anything about the purge, or reference the purge but not specifically name Saint Necrophorus, right? Because you would need both of these premises. So basically, like in this case, if we had these two premises of only Saint Necrophorus escaped the corroded goddess's purge of heretics, and then the next premise is the statuette of the saint with, let's just say, the crown of beetles. Or not even that, might even too obvious, but honestly, let's say crown of, I don't know, worms, who cares? So only Saint Necrophorus escaped the corroded goddess's purge of heretics. The statuette of the saint with the crown of worms escaped the purge. What conclusion can we then draw from these premises?
Saint Necrophorus has the crown of worms.
That's right, and she escaped the purge, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we could go that direction, or we could appeal to the, or we could link it to the. It's hard to explain without getting really into syllogisms, but basically you have these different like terms that you're referring to. In this case, we have Saint Necrophorus. So the second premise would identify her. So it might say the statuette of Saint, or the crown of worms, is Saint Necra. Like this could be the alternative, right? The conclusion would then be the statuette of the saint with the crown of worms escaped the purge, is the one that escaped, or depicts the one who escaped the purge, right? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I kind of like the first one better.
Yeah, I kind of like the first one a little bit better too. I don't mind it being like the crown of beetles, or I like, or something like that. But what also popped into my head while we were doing this, that could link both the syllogism to the lore a little bit. I'm sorry, I know I'm digging deep into the lore bits apart when we're trying to explain this a little bit better. Is so the sarcophagolum open, like when it breaks open, or it exists, it grabs all of the sarcophagi around the sarcophagus. Clearly are saints of the goddess that we're trying to figure out, right? But she is in somehow, some way, a heretic against the goddess, right? So she is a good one. We know that it breaks open a room that has the true sarcophagus in it, of one of the big saints or whatever. What if it also opens up like a smaller area, or like a wall or something like that, where maybe there were saints that don't have sarcophagi because they were heretics, but somebody carved little statuettes of them and almost made like a small altar chamber or something. So it breaks open like a little section where basically there might have been another heretic or something, and they made these little statuettes of these other ones, right? So there might be like a series of small statuettes that they find at some point. Also in that room, like they were heretics, they don't get sarcophagi, they don't get it, right? But somebody gave them a little something, made statuettes, put them with all the rest of the saints, as like a little honorific, almost like, when there's like a cemetery of like Catholics and Protestants, they can't get buried together, but they're buried adjacent. And there's a series of statuettes, which actually gives you the idea that there were a number of heretics, and then they have to pick which statuette is the right one. Almost as if it breaks open like a little altar. And then something about our syllogism here helps them identify which silhouette is the correct one.
I love it. So basically, I'm
Or
just kind of
statuette.
put together like a really quick summary. So we have the only saint, Necrophorus, escaped the corroded goddess's purge of heretics. She was the only one to escape. The statuette of the saint not buried in the holy necropolis depicts she who escaped the purge. So in the puzzle, the conclusion of the syllogism is the statuette of the saint not buried in the holy necropolis is of Saint Necrophorus.
Boom. I love that.
So there we go. So let's go ahead and so the statuette of the saint not buried in the holy necropolis depicts Saint Necrophorus. So that is our syllogism, right? This is our sort of logical construct, little logical thing here that we are going to use to guide players towards this solution, right? So we have these two clues here. The players could potentially find them in either order. These are kind of scattered, in different parts of the dungeon. So the players will have to move through danger, maybe even discover secrets, So to find them, we can work that out here in a second with our complications. But when the players get these two clues, they will go, okay, the statuette of the saint not buried. Oh, this is Saint Necrophorus. We can then bring it back to the patina ghost and say, hey, this is the one you were looking for. So one thing I'll note here to remind people, the way that these lore puzzles typically work is that the players know what the solution is up front, right? That helps them draw the conclusion or the syllogism. So what I'm imagining is there's a point where the players encounter the manifestation of the patina ghost, and she just says, hey, to get down there, I need to be covered in the dust of the one saint, who survived the purge, and then the players can go off and know, oh, okay, we have these two little bits of information. These are relevant to the puzzle. We draw the conclusion, and then we can go and grab that statuette, crush it up, and cover up the manifestation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think on that note, could we do a quick break, and then when we come back, we can work on the clues and the complications?
Sure, absolutely. We'll be back in just a
Awesome.
moment. All right, we are back for more of the Charnel Goddess. So this is our syllogism, and so now we have to actually create. Are we doing the actual puzzle? Like what the players need to physically do?
That is correct. So what we're going to do
Okay.
here is create actual clues in the dungeon that the players can find that will reveal these two little premises to them, right?
Okay.
So there's something in the dungeon where they'll find it, interact with it, and learn, oh, okay, so only, Saint Necrophora, she was the only one to escape the corroded goddess's purge of heretics. There'll be a clue somewhere else in the dungeon that reveals the statuette of the saint that was not buried in the Holy Necropolis that depicts the one who escaped the purge. And then that's what will lead the players to this conclusion, which they can then use to solve the puzzle with our Patina Ghost manifestation. So what we're going to do is bounce back to slide 14.
Okay. I think this is 14.
So,
okay, yep.
It should be the one that has the 6 kind of green looking.
Yes. Yep.
So for those who are listening and maybe not watching, I have a little board here with a couple sticky notes, 6 of them in total, and each one describes a different kind of clue that the players might find in the dungeon. That includes writing, image, speech from an NPC or monster, evidence of past effect, demonstration of an effect, and reaction to player action. So what we're going to do is grab a d6 if you could for me, and you're going to roll to determine the kind of clue that our first premise is going to be.
All right, let me bring up that die. Roll a d6. That was 3.
Speech. All right, so essentially there will be some kind of NPC or other sort of intelligent thing like a monster or whatever. It could be a talking piece of terrain. But when the players interact with it, it will reveal to them this fact that Saint Necrophorus was the only one to escape the corroded goddess's purge. So I'm going to jump back over to slide 16 just to put a sticky note there. I'm going to put speech as the clue type. Now, of course, that would be too easy. We're not done yet. Let me pick a different color for you. So what we need to do is also introduce a complication and a moment, right? So that's going to give the search for the clue a little bit of friction. So if you want to jump ahead to the next slide 15.
Okay.
You should see our 8 sticky notes, each with a different complication for this clue. And again, if you want to get a deeper look at these, we talked about it in the previous episode. Go ahead and roll for me a D8 to determine what complication we're going to introduce here.
I got a 1.
So the clue is guarded by or is itself part of a monster. So my first thought here was basically there is some part of a monster that can talk and maybe has an intelligence distinct from the actual monster, and the players have to somehow defeat or free whatever this thing is so they can talk to it. You know what I'm saying? But we can come back to that. But basically, we have our clue here. The players learn about the fact that Saint Necrophorus was the only one to escape the purge. They learn of that through the speech of some NPC or intelligent entity that can speak. And the complication is that this clue, this NPC or whatever it is either guarded by or is actually itself part of a monster. Now, the last thing we want to roll before we start really getting into this is our moment, right? So we're going to splice each of these complications with a moment, because as we've talked about in previous episodes, we want to basically inflect everything that we design in our dungeon through these foundational, iconic dungeon crawling moments, which you did a whole episode about, and I have a whole course about. So if you want to bounce on over to the random moments table that we've used and give us a roll on that.
Random dungeon moments table. All right. It's a D4, D6. All right. So let's do 1D4, add 1D6. All right. So let's roll on that. I got a 45, a role-playing prompt.
Gotcha. So the moment that this clue or the search for this clue involves a role-playing moment. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that. I'm running out of space here, but basically, if you go back to slide 16, these are kind of the ingredients of our first clue for the puzzle. So we have this, again, I keep repeating myself, so I apologize, but I really want to drive it home. We have something in the dungeon. It's either guarded by or is part of a monster. It can talk, and when the players interact with it, it will reveal to them, it will tell them that only Saint Necrophorus was the one who escaped the corroded goddess's purge of heretics. And that the role-playing moment or the clue, the moment that it tries to create is a role-playing prompt, which kind of makes sense, right? That there's something we're talking to. So there's an interesting role-playing moment here that happens. So what are you thinking? How are we going to combine these different ingredients to create the clue?
Okay, so this is where my brain went first, right? So as I said, we have the two NPCs in the beginning, right? And their general vibe makes you feel like the Lich is the bad guy and the Saint, the priestess, is the good guy, right? So, and we have a bunch of other priestess situations, saint situations in this tomb, which makes sense because it's the tomb to the Eternal Goddess. But we don't really have any more of the Lich situation, right?
Right.
So what if there is something like that, like another Lit situation, something that appears to be bad? They have to talk to this thing, and it sounds like somehow they have to be given this lore bit, this like that there was at some point heretics to the goddess, that some purge happened, right?
Yeah.
So,
and to get to this NPC or whatever it is that talks, the player characters are going to have to overcome a monster, right? Like that's the complication, is they can't just waltz up and, you know, talk to this NPC and get the clue. Like they're going to have to battle a monster to get access to whoever or whatever is talking to them, right?
Well, so my question too, though, because I guess so the clues are not where the puzzle is, right? So it's not like the Bettina ghost is going to just feed them the lore.
No, this is something separate. You want to scatter the clues and the main puzzle area kind of across the dungeon, right? Because again, one of the things that we want to do with puzzles is encourage the player characters to move through the dungeon, to explore the peripheral, out of the way areas, to get off the golden path, and to move through danger, right?
So question then, bringing back something we did previously, right? I don't think we fleshed this out yet, but we have the idea for it. Maybe I'm wrong. We were talking about a room where there is a statue, which, my God, this dings off so much in my head now to go back and do, right? We have statues throughout this whole fucking thing, right? There's the water ones with the spider fungus situation, but we've talked about that room where there is just a statue in the middle of it, and just stepping in, you're basically just blasted away, right? So
Yeah.
we've talked about maybe like having to coat yourself or bones or something with this protective wax to be able to cross that room. That could be a saint of whatever is causing that effect, right? So if they are crossing the room, they could stop, see the lore bit on her statue, see that it's another saint of some type of corrosion, and keep going. I love that. That's a more lore of the saints and their effects are associated with their sainthood, right?
Yeah.
But in that room, didn't we talk about in that room there being some type of like bone wraith or like rust fragment skeleton wraith or
Yeah.
something that so
If a character is killed in that room, they become a rust wraith that speaks something. And I don't think we actually worked out. I can look really quick in our docs, but I think we kind of left open. I know it was a reward, but I think we sort of left that as an unresolved detail of
what if the bones in there are actually the allies of this lich guy. So clearly the lich NPC is the good guys, and they probably came in with a bunch of people and they all got fucking murked, right? Lich survives in the beginning, but what if that room and all those like bone bits and dust in there is bits of his previous allies, right? So when you add a little bit more to it, it creates this wraith of all of the lich's allies, right, that feeds you a bit of lore, a bit of this information, and it could feed this information that they need, right? Yeah. Where it basically, it doesn't even need to just become a wraith and just speak to them, kind of. I guess, there's that option. I almost picture it like either acting out a scene of like its life, or like seeing almost more like a scene of this wraith, or when it talks as if it's like having a conversation with someone else, and they're almost more like witnessing it than the wraith actually talking to them. Maybe a little bit of that. And my thought is basically the wraith is the bone bits of previous people, and the combination of it being reconstituted gives them this clue about Necrophorus. So they actually need to overcome. We could tweak that room a little bit, where maybe the NPC doesn't necessarily have to die, but if they actually do defeat this puzzle of this just like corroding statue, they see the wraith reconstitute and give them this information as they're crossing, maybe. Yeah,
I like it. And you hit on something, a little piece of advice that I want to give people who are watching or listening. I'm going to type it in the Jamboard here. But one trick to help the clues feel a bit more organic, right, and to make them just a little bit less obvious, is that you should take the premise for granted in the clues and never just state the clue outright. So in this case here, with like, okay, we want to talk to the NPC, and then the NPC is going to reveal this information about Saint Necrophorus. What you want to avoid is the NPC just being like, "Oh, here's this little piece of information that I think you'd like." You know what I mean? Like that can feel a little contrived. What you want to do, and I like what you did here, is take the premise for granted. So assume, okay, this Rust Wraith already knows this information, and then go one step further. So the Wraith is never going to say, just turn to the players and be like, "Hey guys, check this out. Saint Necrophorus was the only one to escape." Rather, what would this Wraith say, taking this information for granted, right? It's kind of hard to explain it because also it's 11:40 where I'm at. But what I'm thinking here is like, okay, the Wraith knows this information about Saint Necrophorus, that she's the only one to escape the corroded goddess. So in my mind, it might be, I'm using this kind of like it's reenacting a scene, right? Mm-hmm. It could be, I'm picturing kind of like a recreation or a reenactment of something it did before it died or as it died. It could be reenacting trying to help Saint Necrophorus escape from being chased, right?
Mhm.
and it could speak her name, and basically it looks like it's ushering her into an escape route. That way the players can, pretty reasonably, like, it's not like a big leap of logic to go, oh, okay, like, she was the one who escaped the purge, she was the only one, but we're not just having the ghost like turn to the players and say, oh, by the way, only Saint Necrophorus escaped the you know what I mean? Like, we're essentially
Mhm.
trying to make it feel more natural. I don't know if I articulated that very well,
You
but
did.
you know what I'm getting at? Like, it's just
Yeah.
don't take the premise for granted and go from there. Because that's how
So
you get these
here,
weird puzzles. Like, why would this clue be here? Why would this NPC be hanging out just to wait for someone to come across it? Like, I'm not a big,
right.
for me, things don't have to make sense. I'm not one of those guys, but it can just, again, it helps make it feel like a more natural part of the environment, more thematic. It gives you an opportunity to dip into the lore more, but also it just makes it just a little bit less obvious, right? Like, okay, the players have to do just a little bit of thinking here to figure out what's going on.
Okay. So listen to this. Listen to what I got cooking here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What if the phrase isn't only Saint Necrophorus escaped the corroded goddess's purge of heretics, right? What if it is Saint Necrophorus? What if it is Necrophorus is the only saint that escaped the corroded goddess's purge of heretics, right? And then
Yes.
so they're saying, so what I'm saying is there's a purge of heretics, right? And some escaped, but she was the only saint that did, which means she's the only like
Yeah.
powerful one that did, right?
Yeah.
So then who, the question always in the back of my mind has been, who's the lich? Who is this guy?
Yeah.
Who is this guy that's helping you? It's one of the heretics.
Ooh, I like it. I like
And
it.
so that's why he knows, because he used to be one of the worshippers of the charnel goddess, right?
I love
So
it. Yeah.
when the purge happens, right, the lich NPC survives, right?
Yeah.
The purge, right? But the only saint that originally survived was Necrophorus. My idea in the corrosion room, right, is exactly what you just said. Imagine this, right? The wraith, as they're crossing the room, they see the wraith appear, right? And they're watching a scene play out, but they only see the wraith's physical body doing it, right? They can even see like something coming through the door, right? Maybe it even comes through them from behind,
I love it.
right?
Yeah.
And then it comes in front of them, and it's basically like ushering someone with it and basically saying, like, Necrophorus, like, you have to escape the purge, you have to do this, you have to do that, or whatever, right?
You see,
And
that's
then,
exactly what I mean. Yeah.
and then he shoves her through, shoves something which you assume is Necrophorus, but you only see his physical body, right? Whoever this other unnamed wraith NPC is, through the other door, and then turns around to face the statue and then the wraith gets blasted apart.
Yes, that rules.
As you would by the statue if you just walked into the room. So you
Yeah,
basically
dude.
see the recreation of the wraith enter the room, push Necrophorus out the other side, and then get destroyed in the room in the same way that it got destroyed, that you would get destroyed in that puzzle room if you haven't defeated the puzzle. So you see the reenactment of him pushing, and not only that, the room should be on the way to where the puzzle is later, because maybe Necrophorus escaped the purge, but maybe she didn't get out of the tomb.
Yes, I like it. So room. I don't know why I'm doing that. Let's see here. Just making some notes really quick. Room on way to puzzle chamber. Awesome. That was amazing. No, great job. Like, that was really, really good.
We just put a lot of lore into a tiny bit of space, and oh my god, it makes me so happy now that we know who the lich is too.
Yeah. One of the things that, and this is something that we talked about in the traps episode, one of the ways that you communicate the presence of traps is through a demonstration of its effect. And this is exactly that. Like, the players see this happen, and that demonstrates the effect of this trap that they have to then engage with. So it's doing some nice little double duty there. So yeah, really great job.
Well, so then at that point, maybe even as they approach the door to this room, they don't have to actually even defeat the puzzle. Potentially, right? Even as they approach the room, the wraith could take form, act this out across the room, and then they go, wait a second, you know?
Yeah. So the last thing, I want to staple one more thing on this. So we have our role-playing prompt, and with that moment in particular, it's a little bit more involved than just giving the players an NPC and telling them to have fun. But really what that moment means is you're going to ask the players a very specific role-playing question, right? Mm-hmm. And then use the answer in some. So while you were making those, you're talking about your idea, the idea I had for the role-playing prompt is that this wraith then it can like see the players, but thinks that the players are like part of whatever was going on in the past. And then one or more of the players is basically asked by the GM, okay, what do you do to help the saint escape the purge? So that's what I mean by a role-playing prompt, is that you give the players a very specific question. There's no right or wrong answer. You might use the players' answers to change the way something works in the dungeon elsewhere. But in this case, I like the idea of like, the role-playing moment here is turning to one or more of the players and saying, what would you do to help the saint escape from the purge? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I like this idea of them being like kind of momentarily transported, you know what I mean? Like they're sort of back in that moment, and you sort of ask them what they do. And this is kind of what we've been talking about in the previous episodes, is that's how we thread these interesting dungeon crawling moments, one of which is the role-playing prompt, and we work that into everything we do. I mean, this is a clue to a puzzle, but we've gone from a clue to a puzzle to having the players role play how they help the saint of carrion beetles escape from the purge of the corroded goddess. I mean, it doesn't get better than that,
That sounds so badass.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to do, and the last thing we'll do for tonight's episode, is repeat this process for the second clue that we have, right?
Mm-hmm. This out of the way. Well, so we already have part of this too, as well, because we know that. Now, the question is, are we going to have the statuette buried completely differently, or is it going to be in some like an additional side room of where the sarcophagolum gets up and going, or like...
So why don't we roll our complications in our moment and see if maybe that'll give us an insight into what we might pick.
Okay.
Because I have a couple ideas off the top of my head. So we can fly on back.
On 14, right?
The clue types are on 14. That's what we want to do first. We're going to roll a d6 on that, re-roll 3, because we already did speech.
Okay. I got 1, which is writing.
So basically, we're going to have something written somewhere in the dungeon that communicates to the players that the statuette of the saint not buried in the Holy Necropolis, that depicts she who escaped the purge. So what this implies here is that there's going to be, they're not going to find the statuette and it's not going to have a plaque on it that says, oh, this was, Necrophorus. Like, it's going to be a statuette, and the only thing that distinguishes it is the fact that it was not buried in the Holy Necropolis, right?
Okay, so if we use a little bit of logic, we use a little bit of this and that, right? If it's the only one not buried there, then there has to be some buried there.
That's right. So we've got writing. We'll kind of come back to this in a second. Let's go to slide 15 here and roll our complication.
Okay, that'll be a D8. Oh, this is just the D8 one. It's just a D8. Okay. I got a 2.
So this one is clue protected by or part of a trap or hazard.
Which could still be something associated with the sarcophagolum, because that is a trap or hazard, and it does tie that back in to some aspect of the sarcophagolum.
And we have a number of like I want to do an environmental hazard because we haven't done a whole lot of those, I don't think. I'm
Okay,
looking
okay,
at the
okay.
list here of like we have like ancient copper battery dust.
Interesting.
We've got I think that was one of Janelle's ideas. We've got like the dust of shed corroded skin. We've got mycelium webs. We got a couple little things we got here. Gas fumes and scrolls. So we got like cloud kill type stuff. So yeah, I'm
Hmm.
thinking like an environmental hazard.
Okay, 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 okay.
Let's see here. Clue protected by environmental hazard, and then finally, let's go ahead and roll on that moments table.
Okay, let me bring that back up. Oh. All right, let me go back to a D6 here. Oh, I got double ones.
That's a hard choice. All right. So if we fly on back to um, slide 16, these are the ingredients for our second clue. So there is some writing somewhere in the dungeon that, when read, communicates to the player characters, hey, you know that statuette of the saint that wasn't buried in the Holy Necropolis? She is the saint who escaped the purge, right? It won't name Saint Necrophorus by name because that would be um it would break the syllogism. We can, we want to just kind of only pardon me, only tie into one of the elements from the first clue, right? So saint to escape the purge. So we have the writing here. When read, it communicates this information that the statuette of the saint not buried in the Holy Necropolis depicts the saint who escaped the purge. This written clue is protected by an environmental hazard, and there is a hard choice involved in getting to or interacting with this clue, right? So a lot of
Hmm.
ingredients we toss into the pot here. What are you thinking?
Hmm. Hmm. Um. So, all right. How is the patina ghost associated with our carrion beetle puzzle? Because I imagine like some type of item they need or something on like a statue surrounded by carrion beetles. So like they don't. I feel like the patina ghost could be somewhere else instead. And my idea potentially is that, so this is clue or hazard, but what if the writing, if the patina ghost is somewhere else, is actually writing by the patina ghost, so it's actually written in some type of patina where they're at. That could be a way to redo her. But the
Yeah.
environmental hazard is what I'm thinking of, because if I think of where what our map looks like, we have that ash lake. We already have something associated with the mycelium webbing in the beginning. Didn't we talk about at some point an area underneath the ash lake of like stalactites and stalagmites put together by like the ash?
Mm-hmm.
Could we
Yeah,
do
we've got
something with that environmental puzzle? Have we done anything with that room, or just kind of came up with the idea of that room?
let's see. I've got our hazard notes here. Trying to find where that was. Just do like a control F. Stalag. Stalactite with ashes in it. Running water drips down with ash water. Cremated mermaids. Can be clue as the hidden tomb above. Let's see, that's all we have for that in our notes.
Okay, so I mean, so that's an environmental that could at least lead to some environmental, something under some room underneath the lake dripping that like ash stuff down from above
I love
could
it.
be
And
the
yeah.
environmental hazard.
So like cave. I always love rooms under like lakes. That's
Hmm.
always like a big favorite thing. So cave or crypt under ash lake dripping down Stalactites might be flooded. Players must, yeah. So basically, that's kind of the environmental hazard they're dealing with.
Right. Is they know the lake above it is this like ash stuff that they know they can't go in. Like I think we've already established above them that they can't go in. They'll just fucking die.
That's right. And so and then moving through this kind of like maze of stalagmites and stalactites that are dripping with this ash lake. There might be like little pools of it they got to avoid. But yeah, there's this kind of environmental hazard is the primary danger, but they have to move through this hazard. That's one of the, the roles of puzzles that I talked about in the previous episode. And it's down in this little like cave area. That's where the writing of patina can be found, right?
Mm-hmm. So what could be down there too if we decide to put the patina ghost in a different spot? Could it be her actually like leading there has to be a reason that they go through this instead of looking down and going, nah, fuck that, and then just like walking away. What if her manifestation is here and she's almost like beckoning them?
I like it. And that she like communicates first through the writing of the patina, like a poltergeist type thing. And then that's eventually they can get her to manifest.
Or her manifestation guides them to the writing, like she's beckoning them towards.
Ooh, I like it.
Something written,
And that can lead us to our moment here, which is the hard choice. And there's a number of different kinds of hard choices in games. We've kind of touched on them in previous episodes. If you want to know more, I've written about it for Storytelling Collective. But we have mutually exclusive choice. So there's more than one things the players want to do. Each one has a trade-off, like an opportunity cost and a benefit. The players can only pick one. We can do risk versus reward choice. We can do now versus later. But I like the idea of like either moving through this hazard area or getting the patina ghost to manifest. There's some kind of hard choice involved with that. Mm-hmm. Do you have any initial thoughts?
Yeah, so my thing about like having doing something to get her to manifest is like a whole nother layer of like something else that they need to do, as opposed to potentially like her manifesting and then like beckoning them towards something.
Yeah.
And then maybe even almost like disappearing into like I imagine like some type of like wall of iron that's like covered in corrosion or something, but like some of it's rusted and some of it instead is like patinaed. And maybe like the important information is like rusted over or like like the names are like too corroded to make out, kind of situation. That way you can give the information but not the Necrophorus's name. That's right. My thought is that she manifests and beckons them, and something about the journey through the ash maze or whatever of stalactite and stalagmite creates a hard choice, or about even reading the writing or something creates a hard choice. That's my thought.
I like it. I mean, the first thing that I think of, and this is going to connect the hard choice to the actual hazard, is as the players are making their way towards the the beckoning patina ghost shown in this picture here, a part of the ceiling or wall breaks open and there's like a flood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's some kind of hard choice the players have to make that's related to this sudden flooding of this like ash water, right? This ash infused water. And that could be a risk versus reward choice. It could be a mutually exclusive options, right? There's two things the players can do. It could be a dilemma where they're forced to pick something to give up if they fail, let's say like a saving throw or a check or do something, you know what I mean? But I'm inclined to link the hard choice to the process of negotiating the hazard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely agree 100%. Like, because they could, I mean, at any point they could just be like, fuck this, that's the whole thing. Is like we're like, this isn't railroading. This isn't a narrative that we're writing. We're not forcing the players through our novel. This isn't 5th edition. But we're giving them a choice. We're giving them options. We're giving them a path that they can choose to go down or not. And at
it could be
point,
something
they could actually
like
turn around.
Yeah. And you could, to pass through the hazard, if you want to do like a dilemma, because a dilemma choice is presented in response to a failure, you might just give the players kind of an open-ended sort of like, hey, there's this crypt, like they would. You ever do like skill challenges? I don't think they have them in 5th edition.
Yeah, I love the fuck out of skill. I've adapted them to 5th edition, and I really love them a lot.
So it could be just like, okay, there's a skill challenge to negotiate these caves. Failure causes a flood, and then that presents a dilemma choice. So it could be like, okay, pick one character that gets washed away, or pick one item in your possession. Each character picks one, and those items get washed away or corroded. You know what I mean?
Ooh, even if it's not a skill challenge, what if that is the thing that's presented is like the room is flooding, you see something ahead, right? If you go explore that, the room will continue to flood, right? So you can flee now or go explore that. But if you go explore that, something will happen as you try to re-navigate out of these corroded waters. And then that could be, as you said, as you start to make your way back through, the water is corroding. Like, you all have to pick like an item or a piece of armor or something that's corroded off of you as you make your way out of out of this watery area now, or something like that.
Yeah, unless they burn a limited use spell or roll really well on a check, and then if they screw that up, then that's where the dilemma kicks in. But yeah, so we've pretty much completed our puzzle, right? We've gone from the very, very beginning, where we just kind of picked our verb and our material. We have our template for sort of like a puzzle solution. We use just a basic categorical syllogism as kind of the skeleton. But you can see from there, we developed out these bits of lore, and then we fitted them into our syllogism. We added these complications and these moments. And I think, I don't know how you're feeling about it, but this is a pretty sick puzzle, like a dungeon puzzle, Yeah,
I think it sounds fantastic.
So, the last couple things I want to say about it, for folks watching, it's probably one of the more involved parts of the process. It's definitely more complicated than, say, like creating a monster or that kind of thing, which is why I typically only do like one kind of major puzzle per dungeon. You kind of have one big puzzle, because you can see there's a lot of moving pieces to it, a lot of things to work out, and it's something that moves the players through the different areas of the dungeon, encourages them to move to these peripheral areas. Like, I'm imagining this like cave crypt is like an optional area, like you described. Like, the players might see it and come across it. They don't have to go through it. They know it's dangerous, but that becomes a choice they can make. Like, do we want to try to get the benefit of solving this puzzle by moving through this dangerous area, or do we want to take our chances and move on? But there are ways to add if you want to do more than one puzzle, you can link them together, where the solution to one puzzle becomes a clue, like a syllogism. There's actually a term for it called polysyllogism, if you want to get really fancy at a party. But basically, for those at home, one typically works for a smallish dungeon. You kind of have one puzzle, and that's kind of the main one that you get the players working on. But yeah, I'm hopeful that people found this to be a useful illustration of the process. In the previous episode, I did talk about how this process is definitely one where you need examples to really kind of grok it. And I hope that you feel, Ryan, that this episode helped crystallize this process for you.
Oh, it's great. My question is, the original thing that we were looking at was, well, what's being covered in the statuette, and what are they getting for that?
So I think, we could make it her physical body is down there. And if she's able to be protected, the manifestation of the ghost can bring her body back. And then maybe she sings, and the singing like triggers something in the sarcophagolem to be under her command, under your command, that's one of the little details we can work out. But yeah, I mean, it could really be at this point anything we want, and that's something that we didn't touch on a whole lot. Are two elements of the puzzle need to be the reward and the punishment. So obviously, if the players screw up and like cover, the manifestation of the patina ghost in the wrong statuette dust, that'll be a problem, and that's where you would go to like your trap or your monster process and design something there, right? But that's kind of a detail that you can sort of develop separately. You can either do the puzzle first or do the monster or trap first and then kind of combine them together. And then same with the reward. Like we kind of worked it out here, that the sarcophagolem is friendly, but you could also just leave that blank and do the puzzle first and then work out what the, what the reward's going to be. But yeah, I mean, it's an involved process. It takes us 2 hours to put together this like really fully fleshed out dungeon puzzle, but it didn't require any particularly like big brain skills, right? We didn't need to like come up with a really obscure, kind of brain teaser here. I mean, really, and correct me if you feel differently, most of the stuff we did tonight was just spitballing cool lore. And that for me is the real value of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what's great about the lore puzzles is not only have we created this fun puzzle, we added so much lore to the entire dungeon itself. Like we figured out who the Lich is, we figured out who the Wraith is, we figured out like a bunch of aspects to other puzzles and traps and areas of the dungeon by coming up with the lore for this puzzle. And it's a badass puzzle, like you said before. Like we're talking about the escaped heretical Saint Necrophorus of the corroded goddess, and like it's fucking badass. Yeah.
And I hope it's apparent the advantage that a puzzle like this has over, the quote checkout line puzzles from the previous episode, because, as I mentioned, really the biggest value add with puzzles, the biggest role they play is to provide an incentive for the characters to dig into the lore of your adventure and to have those fun aha moments of not only, finding lore, because, a lot of players, and I'm one of them, like the lore for its own sake is rewarding. It's cool, but you get to have those moments where you have these different clues and you put them together and you can draw the conclusion like, oh, wait, so that means the statuette is, the one that's not buried in the necropolis. That's Saint Necrophorus, and she was the one who escaped the purge, and that's the one that the patina ghost is looking for. Like it just creates these moments where all the lights go off in your brain and you're making these connections. And, as Rafe Koster talks about in his book, Theory of Fun for Game Design, and as other game designers talk about, like that's kind of the essence of fun in games, is that learning, that making of connections and solving patterns. And then I think too, like, again, think back to some of the puzzles that you've played or run where it's like it's a Sudoku puzzle. Like my hope is that, for you, Ryan, and for those watching and listening, it's very apparent how this is different from those kinds of puzzles, and my hope better than those kinds of puzzles. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I've said this a couple times. It's intentional. It fits. It doesn't feel like something got tacked on. And like you said previously, like it doesn't feel like it's like a aha, I tricked you, kind of, whatever for a puzzle in a dungeon, right? Like I'm not Googling, common like Sphinx riddle and shit,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
it all ties into the adventure, which is going to help with immersion, which is going to help with, you know, just the adventure itself, the vibe that the players get, the, you know, like I said a second ago, like we fleshed out like 3 rooms and created lore for an entire sect of the aspects in this by creating this lore puzzle, and it all makes sense. It all feels intentional. It all feels like it belongs. And that, especially in adventure writing, is so important because, you know, too many things can take you out of what you're doing. You know, this isn't, we don't need to create a mini game within our adventure so that you can, you know, move on to the next thing. This doesn't need to become chocobo racing, you know? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Or doing like you know, a cryptex or some shit like that. Like,
exactly.
you know, the kind of
So,
thing that's gonna make a player get up and go do the dishes or something. Like this is
yeah.
you're not pushing the players out of the experience, you're drawing them in. And
That's the thing. You're drawing them even deeper in because they're gonna go, oh my god! Like you're giving them hints of the lore and stuff, and you're just like, wait, what? Like this is what? And we have like, you know, I've, you know, been in sessions where people literally are just like, all right, yeah, all right, well, like whatever, you guys figure out the riddle, you know, like, well, whatever, I don't know. And this, I feel like you just said, is going to draw people deeper and deeper into the adventure, like keep them more invested, keep them more interested in finding out even more clues and more lore bits and stuff. So yeah, I mean, super helpful, super insightful. And like you said, I hope everybody gets a lot out of this. And this is definitely the process that, you know, I will always be using for writing adventures going forward. It's, you know, you can make a whole, even if you're not writing like a full on thing, you know, this in and of itself is a whole session right now. You can make a whole one shot out of literally just what we just did, you know?
oh, absolutely. Yeah,
So,
I mean, you can absolutely like hang the premise of an entire dungeon just on one of these puzzles. Like I said, you know, you typically want to make them, you know, optional, but you can experiment because again, these don't necessarily require you to like you know, have some kind of specialized knowledge like we talked about in the previous episode with Zach Highwiller and players making decisions. You know, what kind of makes puzzles fall down is that the players can't, there's no breadcrumbs for them, that they can't follow little clues or details that allow them to move toward the solution with reasoned effort. It's this thing where it's like, well, I either know the riddle or I don't, or I know the gimmick of, you know, whatever the DM's trying to go for, or I don't, or I know how to play Sudoku or Sokoban, which I couldn't remember last time. It's like, really, if the players are just moving through the dungeon and finding these bits of information, like it's, you know, syllogistic reasoning isn't super difficult. You know, it's not like big brain stuff. The players will probably figure it out. So you can experiment with making it be sort of like the meta puzzle of the dungeon, right? Like that's what solving the puzzle is what allows you to proceed to the final encounter. You know what I mean? But again, that can be, you know, up to somebody's taste. You may want to always make them optional, but yeah, that was a good one. Do you have any kind of last notes, or does chat have any last questions before maybe we wrap it up and get into our plugs?
no, I think we're good on that. I'm you know, I'm excited to see. I'm excited to get to post and actually really get this fleshed out and everything like that, and we'll see what comes from it. But I think between these 2 episodes, because this is the first 2-parter, you know, clearly puzzles are they can be an in-depth thing that are really important and big in this style of adventure. But yeah. I think we said what we need to say. You know, this is awesome.
And you know, the last kind of little note here is, you know, one of the reasons that we split it up into 2 episodes, one because it's kind of an involved process, but also I really do believe that puzzles are probably one of the most challenging aspects of traditional dungeon adventure design, and maybe worse than traps, one where there's not a whole lot of good examples and is generally like maligned by, like, if you ask people, like if you ask 10 D&D players or 10 RPG players, you know, yes or no on puzzles, you're probably going to get a lot of people be like, you know,
yeah,
not so much, you know. And so I really wanted to help people understand what I think is probably one of the most murky aspects of traditional dungeon design, and I hope that we were able to give people a taste of that over the last 2 weeks.
For sure. You know, it's definitely a good process, you know, and having a process, I think, is such a big part of it. So, I mean, I definitely got a lot out of it. And, you know, if you're listening and you got a lot out of it, let us know. But yeah, so this is episode 9 out of what will probably be about 12. So we are approaching the latter end of our Seance, design stream here. What is episode 10 bringing us?
So the next episode is going to be about treasure. So we're kind of in the home stretch here. We hit sort of a peak of denseness and complexity with puzzles. We're going to kind of relax a little bit, take it down with treasure. That'll be a nice easy one, nice fun one. And then we're going to get pretty close to sort of a wrap up episode. So yeah, check that out next week.
Dope. I'm excited for treasure and where are we going to put it and what its purpose is in a Deathtrap dungeon like this. So I'm really excited to get to that one. So what have you got? What are we plugging? What do we got new or different with Sersa Victory? I just dropped your link in the chat there for Sersa's linktree/Sersa Victory. But what else we got going on?
So I guess the next stuff coming up is my new RPG writer workshop course. An email just went out today from storytellingcollective.com. If you're not on the mailing list, go to the website and join, where they teased my new course. It will be about traps. It'll be a full theory-based end-to-end online course about creating traps for traditional dungeon adventures. It'd be sort of a much expanded version of the episode that we did. So definitely head over to storytellingcollective.com. I also have a number of courses there already in the RPG Writer Workshop series, along with some other things like Write Your First Gothic Romance, Choice Design in Choose Your Adventure type books. On my itch page, we've got a number of adventures I put out recently for Shadow Dark. I also put out a monster, the Erdtree Burial Watchdog from Elden Ring. And I'll be having Shrine of the Jaguar Princess will be out in print very soon. The editor is working on the final corrections to that, so definitely follow me on itch if you want to get updates. And that's pretty much it for now.
Nice. And I'm excited to get that in print. You know, I try to get everything that you have in print. This is all Sersa right there if you're watching, and it continues on. And here on the Adventure Archive, we wrapped up our Cyborg stream. Not quite sure what we're doing next on our regular Thursday with Jason. I think we're going to be playing Liminal. And on the weekly scroll this week, I believe it's on Sunday, we're going to be going over the Die RPG put out from Rowan, Rook, and Deckard, which was, I believe was a graphic novel prior to that. Now it's a game. We're going to be going over that, so that'll be an interesting one. But that is future plans for Sersa Victory and for us here on the Adventure Archive. As we said, check out Sersa's Linktree/Sersa Victory. Check us out on YouTube at the Adventure Archive. You can find all of the rest of our links from there. But go ahead, swing by there, hit that subscribe button. It's free for you and good for us. So that's it. That's all I got.
Yeah, me too. I think we can call it another episode in the can.
Boom, donezo. So check us out next week, same time, between 7 and 7:30 probably, Tuesday night Pacific. And everyone, you all have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
See you, folks.